Welcome to the Vital Vagina, where we delve into brave and crucial conversations about the womb and feminine power. This podcast is not just for people with vaginas. We all come from the womb, and there is much for everyone to learn from this place of deep wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle Cornelius. I'm a chiropractor and holistic pelvic care provider. I've been working in the feminine healing realm for nearly a decade, and I am honored to bring this work and these stories to light. Today, I have the honor and privilege of sharing with you a conversation I had with Tami Kent. Tami Kent is one of my dearest mentors. She is a women's health physical therapist and creator of holistic pelvic care. She also authored 3 wonderful books: Wild Feminine, Mothering from Your Center, and Wild Creative. Tami and I talk about her journey from women's health physical therapist to her own modality, holistic pelvic care, after having worked with thousands and thousands of women of all ages and backgrounds. We also discuss how lineage wounds and patterns can run through our energy systems, through our family lines, and ways that we can work with that kind of energy. I really hope that you enjoy our conversation.
Well, it started out more just as I was a women's health physical therapist working in the pelvic bowl and just working more mechanically. So helping women with various challenges like urine leakage or organ prolapse, things that women don't tend to know that are happening unless they start to happen to them. So women's health physical therapy is a kind of a little known practice that works on the pelvic health. And I loved that, even just doing that and getting to help women. It's kind of like midwifery to me. It's like a very women empowered, helping women heal their bodies, spending time in intimate space. But when I was working with women, I felt like, first of all, I could feel a lot of energy that I didn't really understand. One was a really powerful energy that I would call the feminine that I just, when I first encountered, I really didn't even know what it was. So I had to investigate that. And then the other was a lot of emotional energies that were pent up. The most prominent one was grief. And grief has a real heaviness to it. And so there were just things I was feeling that I didn't have any words for. No one had ever talked to me or taught me about, as well as just the power of the energy. I felt like there was a way maybe to start to interface with it. And holistic pelvic care was born of that, of my desire to serve the female body in a more empowered way, utilizing the helpful aspects of the pelvic bowl, really more like acupuncture or Chinese medicine, where you're working with the body's qi. In those professions, it's thought of that qi has an intelligence, that the body has an intelligence, and that you can tap into and learn from the body about what kind of help it needs, as well as begin to access that energy to support the alignment in the body. And so it was in that kind of vein that I started working with the body and eventually developed a body of work called holistic pelvic care that is a combination of physical and energetic tools designed to work with the body's energy field and heal or work with patterns that maybe aren't serving, work with trauma imprints, and really, it's like a feng shui for the pelvic bowl, working with the alignment so that that energy can really flow more freely. And what I found is that how our energy flows in our bodies really impacts how it flows in our lives. So it's sort of this thing of like a dance. If I would work with women and then see the benefits, or I would see where they were struggling in their life, and it would mirror in the bowl. And so it was that dance back and forth that I ended up, creating a huge body of work that included a whole practice of working with the body that I now teach to practitioners. But also I ended up writing books. The first one being Wild Feminine, which is like a manual to understanding the energy of the body, your own female body, and the power that resides there.
I love it so much. I imagine that when you were first doing physical therapy, when you were first starting, I don't imagine that you learned energy work through that system.
No, not at all. I mean, physical therapy is very much a Western medical model. So in Western medicine, it tends to be more symptom-based. So the ways I would kind of look at a holistic practice of medicine is it looks at the whole body rather than just a symptom. So my how I learned was more symptom-based, i.e. there's prolapse, treat that directly, whereas rather than looking at the whole system, which like Chinese medicine will look at things like the organ health, the ancestry, the grief. So, it's very symptom-based. It was also tend to focus on that part of the body rather than the whole person. it also is just, I think there's not a language for energy. This is changing a little bit, I think, but there has not really been a language for energy in Western medicine. The idea of chi and this life force that I could definitely feel, but I didn't know how to interact with. And since I wasn't trained in specific tools, I had to kind of find my own way. But working with the chi of the body, the energy system, is really, really powerful. I found that it was more gentle. It went more to the root of things. It was more effective because we were going to the root rather than just treating a symptom. And it was also really helped with trauma. That was another thing that was missing in my training was many, many women, the majority of women have had trauma related to their pelvic bowls. And when I was working in that space, I felt like I needed more tools when I encountered trauma, how to work with it and how to hold space for it.
Yeah, it definitely seems like being trauma informed is a pretty recent thing for practitioners. I see that same divide in chiropractic. In our profession, it's rooted in energy medicine actually. And there's like two different camps in our world, and one of them really honors that innate wisdom of the body, and they tend to be better adjusters, a little bit more mindful because they're really paying attention to all that. And the school I went to was very much like Western. They wanted to be accepted in the Western world, so they just stuck to the mechanics.
Right.
And I remember going through school just feeling like something feels wrong. Like
Yes.
something's missing,
It's
or like
missing.
people are
Yeah.
touching me in ways that I'm kind of giving them all the no signals, and they're not seeing
Yes.
that.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why I got really fired up about more trauma informed practice and more gentle touch, and then
Right.
eventually went on to take your class and
hmm
only wanted to do holistic pelvic care for a little while
Yeah.
before I was able to fold it all back in.
It's always a journey.
It is a journey for sure. The healing, whether you're on the healer path or a healing path, it's a journey.
Yes.
Um, so what was the transition like for you? If you're working in more of a hospital system, I
Yeah.
imagine in the beginning, and then you're transitioning out, or you're starting to feel all this energy, and while you're still learning about it, what was it that pulled you all the way out, or
Right.
what was that transition like for
Yeah.
you?
And I would invite more practitioners to expand the box that they're in. What
Yes.
I think I didn't even realize I was in a box until I left the box. So I
Yeah.
was working at a hospital, and a lovely, warm, friendly hospital with lots of good people. Had a great vibe to it. And I was working as their women's health, one of their women's health professionals, and really loved my job there. But what happened is I had my first son, who is 19 now, and when I went home to be with him, I didn't want to leave him when it came time to go back to work. And the way most jobs work is you have to be there a set number of hours, and even what was considered part-time still felt like too much time to leave him. He was 3 months old when I first was looking at going back, and I delayed it 3 more months. And I really didn't understand mothering. Like so many things, the feminine perspective is missing, and I had all these ideas of what it would be like to mother a child, and I really had no idea how much they're bonded to your body. And part of being in the feminine realm is really being there in certain time periods for your kids, and if you can. I know that's a luxury, but it was also a circumstance where I had potentially the ability to make that choice. And I really was underprepared for how much children need a primary caregiver or someone that is bonded to them through the body. And so it was that motivating force that caused me to leave my job, which felt really shaky at the time because I thought, I've got my first job out of school and it's a good job, and what will I do? And I really walked away from it. And it took a lot of trust, and he was the primary motivator. But what happened was such a blessing. I ended up working many more like part-time hours. I had a friend who had a chiropractic practice, and she offered me some space in her office for a day or two a week. And I started just seeing clients, and I thought it would be temporary while he was little. And it just burgeoned into me moving into my own space. And then I had 2 more children, and it really worked well with being a mother because I could work more seasonally. So seasonal work makes a lot of sense to me, where I tend to work more in certain seasons and less. So like spring and fall, I work a lot. And then winter and summer, I go back down to less hours. And I thought I would do that again when my children were just little, but that has worked so well for my body that I've continued that practice. And in that freedom of leaving the hospital, where there was sort of a set structure in how you do things, I started working more organically and listening to the women in front of me. And one thing that changed is my clients changed. So usually when you're in a hospital as a women's health PT, people are referred to you by urologists, and that's just kind of how it is. People don't know a lot about women's health physical therapy, and so they might be having issues. They see a urologist and they get referred to a PT as sort of a last-ditch effort. So I was seeing a much older clientele. And when I went and started working for myself, word of mouth happened, and women, I also had a baby, and I felt the pelvic changes after having a baby. And I knew that a lot of what I was seeing in women in the hospital was issues that had been there for a long time and that were not resolved. And then kind of over time, the body compensation didn't work. And so people had more issues. And I thought we should be treating these sooner. So I spoke to a couple of moms groups and just started to get the word out in a different subsets. And then women talking amongst themselves. So I started seeing women of all ages, which was really satisfying. I got to see a lot more diverse clientele, and also women sharing their experiences. Just friends came to see me. So I saw women from across, all different kinds of racial and socioeconomic groups through Portland. And just there was more access to my care. And so in that, I just started really listening to the body in front of me and the woman in front of me, and then also motivated to kind of create something that would work well for their bodies. And so having that freedom, it just opened up my creativity and totally changed how I practiced. And it really deepened my satisfaction in what I was doing. And it served me better as a person, so it was a great leap of faith.
I know some of the best things in life happen after a big leap of faith, but it can be really challenging in the moment.
Scary.
Yeah. And it's true. Like body work, I find, is an art as much as it is a science, and it's a lot more fun when you can, go with the flow a little bit.
Yeah, I think when coming from, like, I was a very academic student, so I had sort of these rigid ways that were more left brain, kind of like linear, logical, and that I think the academic system kind of encourages that rather than the sort of right brain, holistic, more open, fluid kind of thinking. And so I definitely honed the left brain in, academia. And so I kind of entered also healthcare thinking, oh, I could be a doctor or I could be a physical therapist, just these narrow perspectives. And I also would encourage people that are interested in healing to realize there's a whole plethora of ways to enter the healing realm. And there's lots of fun ways to expand. It's really more of like the old style of apprenticeship where you keep studying and you keep learning. I have never stopped being curious and learning new tools, all the different aspects of body work. And, there's so many talented people and teachers out there that are sharing their gifts. If you're drawn to that, it's a wonderful, you can branch out and you can get one type of profession, but then you can really branch wider to where your passions lie.
Yeah. That's one of the things I really loved about taking your classes is I notice in your classes, there's female practitioners from all these different modalities. Like there will be medical doctors and nurses and midwives and PTs and chiropractors and massage therapists. And I just was really drawn to that because in my profession, and I know it's like this in a lot of places, there's just a lot of infighting and ego or like those people are wrong and we're right. It's just like, it just seems silly because there's so many ways. And I just love being in your class and having all these women from different backgrounds, like helping each other and teaching each other instead of saying, I'm right and you're wrong.
Absolutely.
Well, I really wanted to get into, I know the energy piece of holistic pelvic care can help with all sorts of things that women deal with, like pelvic pain, and we can use the medicine from the birth field to help, relieve wounds from birthing and all that kind of stuff. But I'm getting a lot of questions because people have been listening to my podcast now, and I've probably mentioned this work in almost every single episode. People are asking me a lot about the lineage and the ancestry and how that works, like how we're embedded and how does it work that we can kind of inherit these wounded patterns from our lineage.
Right. I mean, I think the body keeps a record. It's like that book that came out recently, The Body Keeps the Score. That's all about trauma. It's a researcher, doctor that has really delved into trauma. And I was surprised by this too. I think it happened for me that I would be working on people's bodies or working with them, and I would be surprised at the way their past experiences seem to inform their body responses. And then not just that, but that of their parents or the lineage they came from. And so, I just started looking at everything's patterns to me. And so I started looking at patterns patterns of alignment or non-alignment, presence and absence. And, I don't know exactly, I can't say for sure because it's a hard thing to test. But what I noticed was, like, for example, if someone had a real absent father line, a lot of men that just kind of stepped out of the picture, they had kind of a hollow energy on the right side of their body. And in Chinese medicine, there's an understanding. Once I started feeling this, then I found out from my friends who practice Chinese medicine that, there's a whole understanding of lineage in the qi, of what you inherit and what you carry. So in some of the more holistic medicine practices, this is just understood. So, I would work with people and I would feel these deficiencies or things, and it would turn out they had that in their lives. Same with mother. If there was a wounding pattern or difficulty, you would feel tension or restriction or absence on the left side of the body. And it tended to be correlated relatively similarly on one side or the other, depending. And so I just started looking at this. And then I would get into deeper patterns. Like, for example, the Holocaust would come up. And I would work with women who had that ancestry, and I would feel into this absolute pit of terror in their bodies that they didn't have, like, their own example, their own life experience that would talk about that. They would say, like, I haven't really had a bad life, or it's been a pretty good life, but there's this pit of terror in their field. And so, we would extrapolate, or they would kind of think about that part of their ancestry, and it would feel like it was from the Holocaust. Well, there now some research showing that grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have DNA changes related to that experience. So people that have had that experience have similar DNA changes. So they're showing that there's this real effect to the way we carry things through our body. And I think maybe we are talking a lot about trauma. There's certainly, you can carry gifts and potentials too, but we talk a lot about trauma because that's where, when something really intense happens, it tends to make a big mark, and also it needs healing. And so that's partly why I talk about it. So, the Holocaust came up, and then I've worked with other groups of people and seen things like in America, people who have Black American ancestry or slavery ancestry. When I work with them, similar kind of levels of terror, somewhat related to like a feeling of the Holocaust, but there's some parallels there, a deep sense of dislocation and terror, a feeling of needing to hide. And so, it's like, I can't say for sure that that's related to that, but I've seen it enough times as a pattern that I would say that's there. And same with Native American, it feels a little different, but there's like a lot of kind of fogginess, and, there's so much trauma around the reservations. And then before that, what happened? So there's just those lineage patterns where it really, that trauma gets kind of locked into the body. And so we need to work on healing that. On another note, maybe on the strength side, because I practice mostly in America, when I'm working with women, we're an immigrant nation. So there's not very many people that have really been here for generations. So in general, there's a real absence of lineage chi in people. So when I work with them, it feels pretty absent, versus when I work with someone, I had a couple experiences with this where I was like, oh my gosh, what is different about your chi? Well, this one woman, she was a 6th generation Oregonian. So she did have this many people of her ancestors that had been here. Her chi was just rock solid. I mean, just incredibly, it was like a fire hose. It was so strong. And when you're in a place for a generation, and then over time in that landscape with the seasons and the same place, a real strength comes together. And it's the same, I've worked with people like from Ireland, for example. There's a real strength in their chi from being over time, but some of them have experienced really difficult sexual abuse or abuse in the family. So with that strength also comes some really locked in painful patterns. So it's just, I'm always working on these lineage pieces, and they're patterns. So we want to draw on the strength, and we want to work on the trauma or the imprints that aren't helpful. That, some of the patterns that maybe tell you what female roles are and male roles are that are restrictive, or what you're allowed to express emotionally, or if you're allowed to be creative, or if you're allowed to mother, or if mother is a burden, or if you're not valuable if you don't mother. I mean, it's like there's all these rules that kind of get handed down, and we can change those if we work with them. So, when I started working on Wild Feminine and writing it, I was writing that as a manual as people were coming in. It took me about 10 years to fully write it. And I started with a couple paragraphs on lineage, and I ended up with a whole chapter. And that chapter is really there to help people delve into the lineage, whether they know their stories or not. So there's lots of ways to work with lineage energy, whether or not you know your ancestral stories. And I kind of go into that in that chapter. But some of the basic ones are it's carried in your body. So you want to work through the trauma patterns so you get more to just a baseline ease. But then on the enjoyable side, if there's a part of your ancestry that has a certain music or food, or, delving into those things, listening to the music of that culture, eating the food of that culture, looking at pictures of the place. If you have any of the clothing that they tend to wear, or even looking at pictures of it, it really activates your ancestral memory. And I think sometimes too, people may have ancestry that they don't even know. They feel drawn to a certain country. Maybe that's past life. I don't know. But I think strengthening those relationships through the bodily experiences can be really helpful for strengthening your chi.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful. I find that when women dig into that book and do that kind of work, that they just tend to move a little bit more quickly through their progress.
Yeah, I mean, it's, in cultures that understand the energetics of lineage, they have a practice of honoring the ancestors. And until I really came into this practice with the body, I'm American, and I didn't really understand, ancestry isn't something we necessarily value, especially because this country is primarily immigrants. So for the most part, people, unless you were brought here as a slave, for the most part, people came here, so they were more fractured. So we tend to be people who are comfortable with fracture and not as much community, and that's in our lineage. So, one way to heal that is to really deepen a sense of place, grow a garden, have a relationship to a place that extends through seasons. And I started playing with this in my own life, which I share in Wild Feminine. But one of the things I started doing was really connecting with this one ancestry that's sort of northern Norway and might be in the Sami region. And I started to just kind of connect energetically. I did meditation. I found some pictures from my grandfather of his great-grandmother, and just started to kind of talk to that part of my lineage, and started having dreams about that region. And then my grandfather, it was a very wounded person. I mean, we barely said, he just could barely talk. So it was a very fractured part of my life. He was there a little bit. I was able to ask him for some pictures, for example, and got that. But his great-grandmother had died when his mother was 1 year old, so there wasn't much known. So I mostly connected through the energetic realm. It was really interesting as I spent this maybe a few months really connecting with her, and I went to visit my grandfather who's now passed, and he came to me and said, I have a ring from my mother that I'd like to give to you, which is sort of that line of the lineage. And I mean, he was the kind of guy who pawned everything because he was struggling for money. And the fact that he brought me something was really out of character, but I thought was a complete sign of the lineage that I had reached and was connecting. And through that lineage, they were reaching back to me.
Yeah. That's so sweet. That's the gift in this type of work, I would say.
Yeah, there's lots of unexpected little treasures when you go digging in your lineage. And I think it's something we all should do because, at the base, we really are one world. So the more that we can kind of deepen into the branches of whatever we are, it's like weaving a tapestry, and I wrote a blessing to the ancestors. You could use that blessing. You could do, light a candle and just honor those who came before you. It's a powerful practice.
Yeah, it really is. I also, someone else asked me this question. What's the difference between our DNA lineage versus when people talk about how we're bigger beings than that, we're more spiritual beings, we've had multiple different types of lives. So how does more of that kind of lineage, how is that different from what's actually literally being passed through the bodies, or does it make a difference?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that is in the mystery, I don't know that I have specific answers, but just I have felt that and talked with people through that. I think one thing is maybe to take off your blinders a little bit, and just even that concept that there could be a bigger lineage aspect or even past life, even just to be open to it can help. certainly I feel like I was a Native woman at various times, because when I work on people's bodies, I have knowledge that I cannot explain, that is from past life, and I think is not necessarily related to my physical ancestry that I embody in this time, which is mostly European. So I think, how does that inform us? I mean, for me, I receive the gifts of the various incarnations, and I do my best to do healing work. It means, though, like, I am not a Native person, so I don't have that bodily experience of oppression. So I think just being clear on that, sometimes people want to,
that's a very
it's like
important
people want
point.
to join something, and you have to really respect what people have experienced in the physical form. So I know that I haven't physically experienced some of the oppression levels that current Native people have experienced. And I think we don't want to, if we get too much in the black and white thinking of like, I'm this race or I'm this contingent, we can close up. It's kind of the way kids have just totally open awareness for their past experiences. Like, my kids used to speak about their past life experiences till they go to school, and then they just boop. And maybe it's partially brain development. They just close. And if we get too rigid in our understanding of our ancestry, we might close off some of the knowledge, So it's about, you want to go back to the dream time. And I think be very respectful of people's cultures and not use cultural appropriation, and be really cognizant where you belong physically, but then also opening to your memory and your energetics. That it's different than your logical mind. It's kind of in the dream time, and receiving it and allowing it, because we really need everybody to step into their healing power right now. I mean, whoever you are, wherever you are, everybody's got to open to the oneness and the fact that the flow comes through, and that the divine, we are all mirrors for each other, and we are all from one tapestry, and taking that and, staying out of ego, but coming into the deeper space of belonging and doing the work and stepping up and helping the repair. I mean, I think everybody needs to be doing repair. We're headed into this time, even with climate change, that I feel like a lot of us have agreed to be here at this time, but it is going to be a lot of work. And so for me, I mean, I've felt this urgency since I was very young. So I think I knew that this was going to be a tall order of not just sitting back and watching TV, but literally, like, there is work to do. So however you feel called into that, it's just, we have to be working on the repair. And I'm preparing, right now, even as I work, I'm helping my kids and kind of the community that's coming up, the young people, the level, the state of illness in the planet, is reaching that emergency proportion. So I guess maybe that's a long answer to your question, but, it's like, stay open, be respectful, stay out of your ego, and really get to work. And we got to just move into action.
So we talk a lot about masculine and feminine energies when we're doing this work. And I'm noticing, and I'm really curious how this has evolved from the time that you started, because now there's so much gender stuff up in the air, and lots of people are talking now. Like, I remember, I first studied with you in 2011. And if I even mentioned feminine or masculine, people would give me the weirdest looks. Like, it wasn't really in our dialogue or in our language, but now it really is. So everyone's got opinions about it,
of the
and
lexicon.
Like all these really concrete definitions about what it means. And so I'm just curious about, like, your perspective on all that after doing this work for so
sure.
long.
There's so many thoughts. One is I would just say, beware of rigidity wherever it lies. The rigidity is not the friend. It's about more openness, more wholeness. And so I think originally what I noticed is that there was a huge feminine wounding in everyone. And that comes from living in years of the patriarchy. And the feminine, that's whether you're male or female or however you gender identify, it's the wounding of this very sensitive, very intuitive, fluid part that understands, like, color and texture and beauty, and is expressive and dreamlike and nonlinear. And, again, it's more the right brain. And because that's kind of gotten wounded and shut down in everyone for various reasons, flat out abuse for one, the patriarchy's, just been sort of pillaging the earth and the peoples. It's just been like this march around the planet, and there's more recent pillaging, and then there's older pillaging. Everybody was once still, it was in a tribe, and it's been this cycle of pillaging.
Yeah.
And in 2012, when the Maya time calendar ended, what it really was signaling is we were entering a new time, and it's a feminine time. A lot of people have talked about this new 5,000-year cycle of a more feminine time. And so to me, it's time to look at where we've been wounded in our feminine and heal it and repair our connection to it. And that's why I wrote Wild Feminine, was to understand what feminine was, which I understand as a sacred ability to receive, and look at where we've been wounded in that. Where have we shut down our ability to receive because of, oppression or trauma, or even just denigration of, you can't wear that color, or just all the subtle peeling aways of the feminine, as I've witnessed in people, felt in myself, and then had to deal with 3 sons, the stripping away, and how it is equally stripped away from males at an early age, and it has taken a fierceness to try to keep it intact. And even then, it's the rest of the world is tearing it. So it's a recognition of the feminine and a repair of the feminine. And then when we get that online, it creates whole new patterns of masculine. So we have not really we've hardly seen a healthy feminine, let alone an integrated feminine masculine, where the masculine's truly in alliance with the feminine. So to me, that's the work of our time. It's to repair, connect with, and in our own feminine, and then match it to the masculine. Let there be healing, and let the new masculine forms, which I think of masculine as kind of the outer expression, the way we give form to our lives. So it can be work, relationships, families, parenting, creativity, just any form you're creating in the outer world. And if that's not influenced by the feminine, so how that looks when it's influenced is there's cyclical thinking, the earth is included, all the women and children are protected, care of the elderly, honoring of the elders, and a deep understanding of our interrelationships, more of a communal way of approaching things, not a hierarchy, not a taking. So it's just, there's a lot to repair here, because very few systems actually have that all ingrained. So it's people doing the repair first for themselves, and then as we each do the repair, what we create will have that repair in it. So, if you think of all the structures, all the business structures, all the money structures, the housing, the healthcare, most of them are built on the patriarchal system and sort of the capitalism, just the growth that, anything that grows without a cyclical nature to it, that would be cancer. Yeah. And that's kind of what in the Western world, that's what our economic system is based on. So all those systems, the transportation systems, everything needs to be repaired and looked at from a more holistic, long-term view. So we have to do the work individually, and then we have to do it into all these systems. And it's less about how you gender identify. I do think as people heal this, there's less of a feeling of threat of other. So some of the stuff that has been going on goes away, whatever religion you are, however you gender identify, however your sexual orientation, none of that really matters anymore. It's more about this integrated understanding. So that's kind of how I see it, and the work that needs to be done. I mean, it's in so many different areas, but I think if each person focuses on their own healing and then turns out to the world and starts changing, like for me, it changed how I run my business. It changed how I spend my days and my seasons. It changed how I teach others, changed how I parent. I'm in that model now where I have my son going to college, but so much of what I talk to him about is about his long-term balance and relationship with the world, not not this linear trajectory. And what I notice is, I'm still watching my sons become young men, so it's kind of early to tell, but I notice him seeking to come home, and just, all the things, like when we went through the college, it's just a small thing, but it relates to a lot. When people went to kind of enter the college program, it was a lot about, where are you going and what school? And we were really looking at what makes sense as a family, what can allow us to keep a relationship. So he ended up going to a school that's about 2 hours away, and he's chosen to come home about every 3 weeks. just for a little touch in. We talk, several times a week. There's an interrelatedness there. I've always thought this idea of independence that we have in America is kind of a false way of thinking. It doesn't include the feminine relationship. And so what I'm seeing is that to be true, that there's just more of this interrelatedness because we need each other. It's not about pushing your kids off and then like they figure it out. It's about staying in relationship and kind of finding your way and being able to make your contribution to the world while you're supported. That's a feminine masculine blend.
Yes. Aw, I love that. Thank you so much for giving us all this wisdom. I'm really excited to share this with everyone.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Such a joy to chat with you.
If you're interested in more information about Tami Kent, how to work with her, or find her books, you can find her at www.wildfeminine.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find show notes at vitalvagina.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and share with your friends. We'll be back next week with another episode.